Welcome, fifth graders. Today we're going to talk about simplest form. And our question that we're solving today, how do you write a fraction in its simplest form? So the first thing we need to remember or understand is what is a factor, because we're going to use factors today to help us put a fraction into simplest form. Now, if you think back to the greatest common factor lesson, a factor is just two numbers or a number that multiply together to give a product. So the numbers that we multiply together to get an answer or to get a product is a factor. So a lot of numbers have multiple factors. Some of them only have two factors, one in itself. But say 10 has 1 in 10 and 2 in 5. So if you need help with remembering how to do greatest common factor, go back to the previous lesson, GCF, and watch that video, how to do factors. Next, then, we have common factors. Now, common factors are factors that two or more numbers have in common. Remember from the GCF lesson, we listed out the factors of one number, and then we listed out the factors of another number, and we looked for the ones that were the same in both. Okay, and then we actually found the greatest one, or the biggest one that was in both, called the GCF. So we're using common factors today to help put a fraction into simplest form. Now, simplest form, what is that? The definition of simplest form is just a fraction with the numerator and the denominator when they only have one common factor. There are no other common factors except one. One is the only number that goes into both the numerator and the denominator. Now, to put a fraction into simplest form, here's what we're going to do. There's just a couple steps, and it really refers back to the GCF lesson. That's why these two are paired together. But to put a fraction into simplest form, you first need to list the factors of the numerator and the denominator. Now, as you get good at this, you can start listing those in your head, but for now, we're going to make the list out and then compare them. So we want to list all the factors, all the numbers that multiply to give us the numerator, and all the numbers that multiply together to give us the denominator. We're then going to find numbers that they have in common, and we're going to divide that numerator and the denominator by one of those numbers that they have in common. Now, it is best if you use the GCF, because that puts the fraction straight into simplest form. If you don't use the biggest number that they have in common, you might have to divide a few times. But if you divide by the GCF, it will be one step and you will get straight to simplest form. You are going to continue to divide. Step 3 here. Divide until the only number that goes into the numerator and the denominator is 1. Now, that doesn't mean that both the numerator and denominator are going to be 1. That is the only number that goes into both the top and the bottom is 1. Okay? Examples of simplest form. Okay, fractions that are already in simplest form. 1/2. The only numbers that give us 1 are 1 times 1. So its only factor is 1. Factors of 2 would be 1 times 2. So the only number that they have in common here would be 1. We know that 1/2 is already in simplest form. Now, other ones, 3/4 is a good example of a fraction that's in simplest form. The numbers that multiply together to get 3, or that are factors of 3, 1 times 3. Numbers that multiply to give us 4, 1 times 4, and 2 times 2. Remember, we make those lists in numerical order, or in ascending order here, least to greatest, so that we can compare them. The only number that is the same in both is 1. So we know that 3/4 is in simplest form. Now, again, there it is, that both numbers aren't 1s. So you don't necessarily have to divide until you get a 1. Sometimes you can divide to just get any number, as long as the only thing that goes into both the top and the bottom is 1. That's when we know it's in simplest form. So another example that we could have would be, let's say, 7/8. We know that 7/8 would be 1 times 7 and 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. Those are the factors. So if you look at both lists, again, the only numbers that we see that are in common, that go into both the top and the bottom, is 1. So the only thing we can divide 7 by and divide 8 by is 1. So that is in simplest form. The method that we want to try to use here, guys, is we want to use the greatest common factor. We want to find the GCF of both the numerator and the denominator. It's going to make our life easy, and everybody likes shortcuts and easy steps. That's the best way to go. The least amount of work possible is to use the GCF. So let's look at our first example here of 6/15. We have a fraction of 6 over 15. Now, we're going to use this method of the GCF to find simplest form. So first, we make a list of all the factors of 6 and all the factors of 15. So for 6, we know it's 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And we know for 15, it's 1 times 15. We know 2 doesn't work, and it's 3 times 5. Now remember, if this is still confusing, go back and watch the GCF video. But if this is making sense, this is what we're going to do here. Factors that they have in common, they will always have 1 in common. Always. But we're not looking for ones that have just 1 in common. We're looking for others. This case, they have 3 in common. 3 is the GCF, or the greatest number that they have in common, the greatest common factor. So we're going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 3. So we take 6 and divide it by 3, and we get 2. We take 15 and divide it by 3, and we get 5. Now, since we use the GCF, we know that we're already in simplest form, but let's think about the factors of 2. Numbers that multiply to give us 2 are 1 times 2, and that's it. And for 5, we have 1 times 5, and that's it. So the only number that they have in common is 1, so we know that fraction is in simplest form. So all we're doing today for simplest form is looking for numbers that can go into both the top and the bottom, the numerator and the denominator. And then we're going to divide by that number. We're going to do that until the only number that we can think of that goes into the top and the bottom is 1. And then we're done in simplest form. So let's look at the next example. 12/24. So we want to put 12 over 24 in simplest form. So we're going to list out the factors of both 12 and 24. So factors of 12. Numbers that multiply to give us 12. Well, we know 1 times 12. We also know 2 times 6. And then remember, we're thinking, okay, does 3 work? Yes. 3 times 4. And since 4 is already in our list, we don't have to keep going, because we know 5 doesn't work and 6 is also in our list, so we're done. That's all the factors of 12. For 24, it's 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, and 5 does not work. So 6 is already in our list. That's it. We're done. Those are the factors of 24. Now, let's look for numbers that they have in common. Well, we know they're going to have 1 in common. But they also have 2. They also have 3. They also have 4. They also have 6. And they have 12 in common. Now remember, we're looking for the greatest common factor, which is 12. So we're going to divide the numerator and the denominator by 12. So if we look at this, we're going to go 12 over 24. We're going to divide the top by 12. And whatever we do to the top, we have to do to the bottom. So we divide the bottom by 12. 12 divided by 12 is 1. 24 divided by 12 is 2. And since we know that the only thing that goes into 1 and 2 is 1, we know that's in simplest form. Now, when you start to do this on your own, you might not think of the greatest common factor. But you might think of other common factors. And for 12 and 24, there were a lot of them. 6, 4, 3, and 2. So this time, let's divide by another number that is not the GCF. Let's divide by 4. If I divide the top and the bottom by 4, 12 divided by 4 is 3, and 24 divided by 4 is 6. Now, when I get 3/6, I want to look at this and go, okay, what numbers go into 3? 1 times 3. And what numbers go into 6? 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Well, look what numbers they have in common. They have 1 in common, but they also have 3 in common. So we, again, are going to divide by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. Now this time we had to do a little bit more work because we had to divide by 3 and then, or 4, then 3. But we still get to simplest form, and it's the same fraction. Now, that could be done any way. We could have used 6 and then divided it by 2. So if we divide both by 6, 12 divided by 6 is 2. 24 divided by 6 is 4. 2/4 is not in simplest form because I know that 2 goes into both numbers. So I'm going to divide the top by 2 and divide the bottom by 2. 2 goes into 2 once, 4 goes into 2 twice, and again, we get 1/2. Let's move on to the next problem here. 9/36. So we're thinking again, what numbers go into 9 and also go into 36? Well, numbers that go into 9, we're looking for factors here. 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. Numbers that go into 36, 1 times 36, 2, and if you counted by 2s, it's 2 times 18. 3 also works. It's 3 times 12. 4 works. It's 4 times 9. And then the other one is 6 times 6. So there's my list of all the numbers that give me 36. 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 times 6. The number that they have in common is 9, 3, and obviously 1. We don't want to divide by 1 because anything divided by 1 stays the same. But we want to divide either by 3 or 9. If we divide by 9, we're going to get that fraction to go straight to simplest form because that is the GCF. So 9/36, divide both by 9 because 9 goes into both numbers. And we get 1, and 36 divided by 9 is 4. 1/4 is in simplest form. Now, if I didn't divide both of those by the GCF, I would divide by 3 because 3 goes into both numbers. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 3 goes into, or 36 divided by 3, or 3 goes into 36 12 times. And I have 3 12s. Well, I'm not done yet. You cannot just stop there. You have to think, what goes into 3 that also can go into 12? 3 goes into 3, and 3 goes into 12. So I can divide both of those by 3. 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 12 3 times 4 is 12. And our fraction, again, is 1/4. So it doesn't matter which factors you use, but if you use the greatest common factor, it takes one step and you're in simplest form. If you don't use the greatest common factor, you just use a common factor, you will have to do multiple steps, but you will still get to the same answer. Let's look at 3/12, which we've had 3/12 in one of the previous problems here. So 3/12, the numbers that go into 3 are 1 and 3. Numbers that go into 12 are 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. And I'll put my commas in there to keep it organized. Again, as you get better at this, you'll be able to do these in your head and think of what number can go into 3 that also goes into 12. And you won't have to make your list. We know that 3 goes into both, and obviously 1 is going to go into both, but we're not going to use 1. We'll use 3. We divide the top and the bottom by 3, and we get 3 divided by 3 is 1, 12 divided by 3 is 4. 1/4 is in simplest form. Let's look at 2/10. Well, since 2 and 10 are both even, we should be able to come up with one number that's going to go into both of them. The only numbers that go into 2 are 1 times 2. And the numbers that give us 10 are 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. The number that they have in common that is not 1 is 2. So we divide numerator and denominator by 2. 2 goes into 2 once. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2/10 is just 1/5 in simplest form. Eight twelfths. Now this time I want to think about numbers that go into both 8 and 12. And I'm not going to make a list this time. I'm just going to think about all the numbers that I know that multiply together to get 8 and also can multiply to get 12. Well, I know 2 can give me both of those. I know 4 can give me both of those. So those are the two numbers that they have in common. So if I divide it by 4, because that's the biggest number that they have in common, 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 12 divided by 4 is 3. Now, let's think about if that's in simplest form. Numbers that give me 2, 1 times 2. Numbers that give me 3, 1 times 3. The only number that they have in common is 1, so I know it's in simplest form. Now, if I didn't use 4 and I used 2 instead, 8 divided by 2 is 4. 12 divided by 2 is 6. If I think of numbers that give me 4, 1 times 4, 2 times 2. Think of numbers that give me 6, 1 times 6, and 2 times 3. Numbers that they have in common are 2 and 1. We're going to divide these by 2 because 2 can go into both numbers. If I divide the top by 2, I get 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And again, I get the same answer of 2/3. Now, sometimes you might get a little bit larger numbers, like 12/16. So we just go down the list. Okay, what gives us 12? 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Okay, well, what numbers give me 16? 1 and 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. Well, both numbers have 2 and 4, again, in common. So we're going to divide by the GCF, or the biggest number they have in common, which is 4. 12 divided by 4 equals 3. And 16 divided by 4, which is 4. 3/4 is your simplest form. And again, if you just think about 3, 1 times 3, numbers that give you 4, 1 times 4, and 2 times 2, the only thing they have in common is 1. Now, it is very important that you understand and know your multiplication facts. When you're doing fractions, there's a lot of multiplication involved, whether you're finding common denominators or you're putting fractions into simplest form. Last example here would be 8/40ths. So sometimes you get really large fractions, like 8/40, or maybe it's 72/100. All you have to do is pick any number that they have in common and start dividing. Even if you can't think of the greatest common factor, you can find a number that they have in common. So in this case, I know 8 and 40 are both even. 2 goes into all even numbers. So I'm going to divide both of these by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 40 divided by 2 is 20. Now, if I look at those, I don't think that's in simplest form. I think I can find something else that goes into both of those numbers. Now, you might be able to think of the biggest number that goes into both of those, but what if you didn't think of the biggest? What if I just knew that 2 went into both of those numbers? Well, I could divide the top by 2 and the bottom by 2. Now, 2 doesn't always work. Remember, if the number is odd, 2 is not going to work. But since both are even numbers, I can divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 20 divided by 2 is 10. Okay, getting closer, 2/10. Well, think of numbers that give me 2, 1 times 2, and numbers that give me 10. Well, does 2 times anything give me 10? Yes. So we can divide by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And our fraction is now in simplest form. Now, from the very beginning, some of you probably saw that I could have either divided by 4, or you knew that 8 went into both numbers. If I were to divide by 8 from the start, 8 divided by 8 is 1, and 8 times 5 gives me 40, and I was already into simplest form. So it doesn't matter if you just divide by a common factor or the greatest common factor, you're going to get to simplest form. But the easiest way is to divide by the biggest number that they have in common, or the GCF. On the next slide here, I've got 4 fractions that I want you to do on your own. I'm going to zoom this in here so you can see it a little bit better. And I want you to divide each one of those and put them into simplest form. When you press pause, you do all the work for all 4 of them, and then when you press play again, I'll reveal the answers. So go ahead and hit pause now. Now I've placed the shade up here, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll this down. The first one was 3/6, and the GCF is 3. The biggest number that goes into both numbers is 3. So divide the top by 3, divide the bottom by 3, you get 1/2. On the next one, there's 2 ways to do it. The numbers that go into 12 and 18 are 6, 2, and 3. So if we divide by 6, which is the GCF, we're going to get 2/3, which is in simplest form. Now, if you chose not to use 6, you might have divided by 2 and got 6/9, and then divided by 3 and got 2/3. You may have also divided by 3 at first and then had to divide by 2, but you would still get to 2/3. On number 5, the only number that they had in common was 2, and that was 3/4 in simplest form. And then the last one, number 7 here, 6/24. Again, they have 2, 3, and 6 in common. If you divide by 6, which is the GCF, you're going to get 1/4. If you divided it by 3, you would probably have to turn around and divide it by 2 to get 1/4. You may have also taken 6/24 and divided it by 2, and then had to divide it by 3 to put it into simplest form. Remember, you're not going to get full credit if you only go part way to simplest form. Make sure you continue to divide until the only number that goes into the numerator and the denominator is 1. Great job today, guys. That ends today's lesson. If you look to your homework, it's on this worksheet. For those of you at home, you can print off the worksheet, or you can work the problems out on a separate sheet of paper and then enter your answers onto Schoology. Great job. Please reach out and message us if you have any questions.